And you've just heard the Ballad of John Hosey, the opening track on Fiona Sae Paing's gorgeous album, Sand, Silt, Flint, which Fiona is touring at the moment. And I'm delighted to be joined by Fiona now. Hello.
Hello, Alistair. Thanks so much for having me on.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. And before we talk about the tour, which sounds amazing, let's talk about Sand, Silt, Flint, which originally I think came out in 2022.
Yeah, it first came out in 2022 and it was a digital-only release on my own label. But then I released it on a CD just on Friday the 28th.
And you have started the tour, haven't you? You've already played the date.
Yeah, I've just had a couple of days ago on Friday, I did a show in my hometown of Aberdeen at the Lemon Tree, which was so fantastic. I was so pleased with the response, and we had almost a full house, and it went really well. I was so chuffed with it. And then next Saturday, I've got another local show in my local small town of Turriff. It's at the CamGlen Hall, which is actually the setting of one of the songs on the album. So that's what I've tried to do for the local shows, is because each song on the album is linked to a different specific place in the Northeast. So for the local shows, I've done them in small like village hall venues near the locations, and CamGlen Hall is one of the places that features in one of the songs too.
Yeah, it very much is a kind of I want to say concept album, but it's an album which is about the kind of that area, isn't it? It's very kind of place specific and ballad specific as well.
Yeah, completely. It all just started off from one track that was linked to a little village near where I live. It's called Udney, and there's a very famous ballad called Bonnie Udney, which is actually sung by a distant relative of ours, but that's another story. I'll maybe talk to you about that later. But so when I had one song based on a location that was close to me, and then at the same sort of time, I was doing a track for a competition that was run by Nature Scott, and the brief of the competition was to create a piece of music that was inspired by one of the Scottish national nature reserves. And the nature reserve, which is closest to me, is Forvey. So I did a track inspired by the legend of the sands of Forvey. So by then I had two songs that were based on like local stories. And it seemed to be quite a logical progression just to continue and try and discover more songs that had links to local places. And eventually, about 4 years later, it turned into the album.
And I have to ask you, we had the Ballad of John Hosey. Who is John Hosey?
Now John Hosey, nobody actually knows if it's a true story, but it's such a strong legend. I think it must have some fact to it at the basis of it. It was based on the Battle of Harlaw, which was fought at the bottom of Fiona Sae Hill near Inverurie in 1411. And the story of that was that John Hosey and his sweetheart Jean used to go out courting on the hillside at Fiona Sae, and they'd promised to marry. But before the wedding, John was called up to fight at the Battle of Harlaw. And when he never returned from the battle, he was just presumed dead. And his sweetheart, Jean, a few years later, gets another boyfriend and is out walking at Fiona Sae. And lo and behold, sees John walking towards her across the hillside. And the story was that he hadn't actually died at the battle. He'd been taken prisoner, but he'd escaped from the prison and walked all the way from the west coast, all the way over the hills to Fiona Sae, to the same spot where he'd met Jean. And it's a terrible, tragic Romeo and Juliet tale, because when Jean spots John, she's so shocked that she kind of dies on the spot. And then John is so grief-stricken that he also dies. And the spot on the hillside that's called Hosey's Well is supposed to have been formed from John's tears.
Oh. That sounds
So
like one of the most
you can't
Scottish ballads I can
can't,
imagine.
I know you can't get more tragic than that, can you? But I've there's quite a few songs written about the battle, like the Corries have done one and the Old Blind Dogs have done one, but they're more sort of focusing on the battle itself and more of the military side of it. But I've sort of taken it with a little twist and written it from like Jean's point of view, and with her being left behind, waiting for John. So yeah, a little twist on it.
So you said, sorry.
And I've got an amazing cello player on that, Alice Allen, who's originally from Aberdeenshire as well.
Well,
So
we've had Alice on the show, actually.
Oh, have you?
Yes,
Yeah.
she's from, is it Bankery she's from?
Bankery, yeah, from Bankery, yeah. We never actually met because it was during lockdown that I recorded the album.
Of course.
So all the musicians, well, the backing of the album is electronically based, but I've got Paul, and I was so lucky to get Paul Anderson on fiddle, Alice Allen on cello, another Aberdeenshire musician, Joanna Nicholson, on clarinet, and a harpist, Irene Watt, and a drummer, David Mackay. He used to drum with the what's it called, Drive Blind, and sound artist called Clutch Daisy, who plays guitar on it. So nobody ever met each other. They all just recorded their parts in their home studios during lockdown, and then I stitched it all together on my computer afterwards.
Sorry.
Yes, I would like to meet them at some point, sometime soon. So
my brother lives in Braemar, so I know a few of these musicians from.
Oh, do you?
Like, yeah, Paul Anderson, for instance, I've seen a few times play, just fantastic.
I know, he's incredible, isn't he? Yeah.
So that maybe leads us nicely onto the tour and what it's like. So if you don't have these musicians playing with you, what can people expect from coming to see you play live?
Well, what I've done, it's a similar idea as to what I did with my last album, because it was purely electronic and I didn't have a band. I didn't want to just like stand on stage singing to a backing track. So I've hooked up with a really brilliant photographer and filmmaker who's based in Aberdeenshire as well. She's based in Balmedy. Her name's Isla Goldie. And for the past 2 or 3 years, we've been collecting footage from all the different locations from each song. So each track on the album has got a video by Isla as a backdrop. And I've also interwoven some archive material from the archives of the School of Scottish Studies, with some like maybe interviews and snippets of old ballads, along with an archive map of Aberdeenshire. So it's you kind of going on a little journey from each around for each place. Yeah. So it's like a film with me singing to it, if you can imagine that.
Yeah, no, it sounds amazing. I'm interested to talk to you about that aspect of it. And I guess it means you can tour it more easily as well.
Oh yeah, that's another great thing, because it basically packs up into a laptop. The only tricky thing for touring the show is my costume, because I don't know if you've seen any photographs of it, but I've had an amazing costume made by an artist called April Presley, and she's made a headdress out of twigs that is about 2 feet high, and it's a bit difficult to take on a train, so I'll have to figure out that somehow.
Yeah, I have seen pictures of it. It looks stunning as well. And another reason that the album connects with the area is that you often sing in Doric too.
I do, because it's funny because my gran was a really strong Doric speaker, and so my mum was as well. But when I went to school, it was a bit frowned upon to speak Doric, and also because I left Scotland when I was quite young. I went to live in London when I was about 17. So, and I've only got back to Scotland in say 2010. So most of my life I've been away from Scotland. So I don't have a strong Doric accent, and I don't speak it generally. But for this album, I'm kind of like channeling my angry granny for a lot of the songs. And It's amazing how when I get into it, I just feel, you know, so connected with her and how she used to speak, and my mum as well. So yeah, so that was a nice thing to discover that it's in there, even though I don't speak it on a day-to-day basis. It's in the DNA kind of thing.
And of course, that means for me, that means Aberdeen is the perfect place to kind of kick off the tour then.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I'm really happy that I'm doing a couple of local shows as well before going further afield.
Do you have the other dates there that you could let us know about?
Yeah, I have them here. Let's see what we got. Right, so the first one is on 15th of March. That's at the CamGlen Hall in Turriff, which is my hometown. Then on the 29th of March, I'm going to Kyle of Lochalsh to the Skybridge Studios.
Mm-hmm.
And then April 20th, at the Glad Cafe in Glasgow. And then going on to May, I'm at Findhorn on May the 3rd at Universal Hall. And then on May the 5th, I'm at playing a support slot in the Tradfest at the Traverse Theatre in Edinburgh for a show called For the Love of Trees. And then on the 14th of May, I'm at the Eden Court in Inverness, and back to Aberdeenshire on May the 17th at Colliston Hall, which is near Newborough. And then I'm finishing off at the Barn Bantry on May the 23rd.
Some great venues there. I'm hoping to come along to the Glad Cafe to see you.
Brilliant, yeah. I played Glad Cafe once before when I was in another act, but yeah, I'm looking forward to going back. Oh yeah, and another thing that I'd like to mention is the tour, because it's been such a epic undertaking. I mean, consider, I think the first time that this sort of show was, first time I started developing the show was back in 2019 through a residency with Aberdeen Performing Arts. And that was to develop a couple of, I had just a few snatches of ideas. I think maybe then I had Forvey and John Hosey, and I think that was about it. So from then it's kind of through their residency that I did in 2019. And then I started working with a really brilliant Aberdeen-based producing company called Open Road. So they've been helping me with all the organisational aspects of everything, like organising the tour, helping me get funding together, and they helped me put together a funding bid for Creative Scotland, which I'm very happy to say was a success. So that's helped me put the whole thing together.
And the album's going to be available on CD for the first time.
Yeah, it will be. Yeah, it's on Bandcamp at the moment, just the digital one, but the CD is also available via Burnham CD.
Fantastic. And you mentioned at the beginning a link to it was a relation that you discovered.
That's right. Yeah. It was just so bizarre. I'd been away from Scotland. I said I left Scotland when I was quite young. I was about 17. I went to London. So I'd been away for years and years. And I eventually came back in about 2009, 2010. And I felt like I kind of wanted to I felt a bit of like a tourist for the first couple of years. Mm-hmm. So I felt the need to kind of like reconnect with my roots and my family and revisiting all the places that I used to go when I was little. And at the same time, my mum was getting obsessed with doing researching our family history. And through that, she found a connection with a local ballad singer called John Strachan, who turned out to be like a quite famous ballad singer. And he'd recorded a whole album of songs from Aberdeenshire, which was released on the Alan Lomax Portraits collection. And yeah, I remember my mum and my granny driving up on the way to Old Meldrum, and I remember my granny pointing out this farm, Cricky, and saying, oh yeah, we used to have a relative that lived at that farm, and this relative turned out to be the John Strachan, who was the singer. And of course, being a singer, I found that quite fascinating, that had a bit of a link to like a ballad singer. But up until that point, I'd had no interest in like Scottish music at all, or Scottish ballads. You know, when you're sort of 16, that's the most like uncool thing, you know. So I was into like punk and stuff. And so I thought it would be quite an interesting thing to do, to all, you know, at the same time as like getting back in touch with my roots and making new connections with my family history. I thought it would be quite an interesting exercise if I tried to maybe do a kind of cover version of one of John Strachan's songs. But up until that time, I'd been doing completely electronic, like experimental music, and I'd never thought of doing anything Scottish. I thought it would be interesting to see if I can like marry the two and see what happens. So that's the first one that I did, was the Bonnie Udney track, and that just came from there.
And did that kind of set the style of music that would become the album?
Absolutely, yeah, because the when I did Bonnie Udney, I thought, wow, this kind of works, although it shouldn't work, you know, weirdy, experimental, like polyrhythmic, blah, blah. It shouldn't really work with like Doric. But it did. It was such a unusual fit, and it did, you know, and so I thought, right, I'll just carry on, see what happens. And I just carried on doing like electronic, more sort of experimental ambient stuff as backings. And then I mixed it in with traditional Scottish instruments, as I said, like from Alice and Paul, and then mixed it in with my vocals, and it all kind of came together in a bizarre way.
Well, I think it works beautifully. I think it's a tremendous album. I mean, you know, listened to it when it came out and been re-listening to it over the last month since I knew we were going to speak. And you mentioned punk there, and something that jumped out at me from your press release is that Iggy Pop is a fan.
Oh yes, I know. God, that was totally bizarre. I got in touch with a writer, Jude Rogers, the Guardian's folk columnist, because she'd reviewed a couple of bands that I really admire, like Bird Ellen and Angela Morrison. I thought, well, if Jude likes them, she might be interested in my music. So she was, and she did a lovely review in the Guardian, which seemingly Iggy Pop reads. Who knew? And then a few months later, his producer from BBC Six Music got in touch with me and said, oh, he'd like to play your music on the show. So he did. And yeah, so that's the highlight of my career so far. I think I'll just retire now.
It's fantastic. I can totally understand that. Absolutely. Well, Fiona, in a moment, we're going to hear another track from the album. But first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Yeah, can I just give you a little bit of background to the story of this song that's going to come up? It's based on a true story about a girl called Margaret Cruikshank, who in 1860, she was, I don't know if anyone knows the Lecht Pass and the Cairngorms, but it's a very bleak, wild, open space. And she was out walking from Tomintoul to go back to her home in Corgarth. And a sudden blizzard came on one day, and she died in the blizzard. And her body wasn't found till about 3 or 4 months later by a local shepherd. So there is a very old song, Lass of the Lecht, but this one is a completely different version, but it's just taken her story and given my new interpretation of it.
Well, that's brilliant to hear. Another dark subject.
I know, they're all dark.
It's the Scottish ballad tradition, it seems to be that way.
We're all doomed.
Fiona, thanks again for taking the time to talk to me. And this is Fiona Sae Paing and Lass of the Lecht.